In this slideshow, we will cover interest groups. We will cover the logic of lobbying, the origins of interest group politics in the United States, contemporary interest groups, and what interest groups do. America's largest interests, such as doctors and hospital associations, oil companies, pharmaceutical corporations, and mega banks, lobby Congress. After the financial collapse of 2008, many lobbyists from the largest financial institutions were locked out because members of Congress could not afford to be seen with them. It would appear that they were cooperating with the financial institutions many believe to be responsible for the economic collapse. Interest groups are omnipresent in American politics, but lobbyists don't dictate what goes on in Washington as much as you might think. They have to work hard to gain access to elected officials because there are so many other powerful interests to compete with. Interest groups and lobbying are inevitable and essential to modern democratic politics. The political system needs organized interests to push for their policy interests, but interest groups and lobbyists are also constantly under attack as threats to democracy itself. They are often criticized for having too much power and undermining the concept of one person, one vote. People understand the benefits of banding together with others of like mind to get the policies they want. Governments have good reason to welcome lobbying, which is defined as appeals from citizens and groups for favorable policies and decisions. The government needs the information that interest groups are willing to provide. The government also needs valuable electoral resources such as votes, money, organizational structure, and skills. Lobbyists are people who represent interest groups and provide information about policy issues to public officials. There are some powerful interest groups that critics would argue have too much power and distort democracy. Some may argue that the NRA is too powerful. Others may argue that environmental groups like the Sierra Club are too powerful. Why not get rid of special interests and lobbying? Eliminating special interests and lobbying would get rid of the liberty for individuals to organize. For the elimination of interest groups and lobbying to work, we'd all have to have the same interests and values. To maintain the First Amendment, we have to tolerate factions. The cure for getting rid of these factions, in many ways, is worse than the disease. During the colonial era, merchants, manufacturers, and ethnic and religious minorities actively sought favorable policies from authorities in London. These groups organized things like writing campaigns. The 18th century saw the creation of the Public Interest Lobby, a group that promotes some conception of the public interest rather than the narrowly defined economic or other special interest of its members. Political parties formed quickly during the early republic. Groups lobbied the national government. For example, the National Trades Union lobbied the 10-hour workday. During the Progressive Era, citizens became outraged with government corruption and lobbied for reorganizing government at all levels. Progressive Era reforms are responsible for some of the various organizational differences in city governments and for election reforms such as the secret ballot. The Anti-Saloon League successfully lobbied for prohibition, which was eventually repealed. Their strategy was focused on electing dries, candidates that favored prohibition, and defeating wets, candidates who were not in favor of prohibition. Labor unions were also a stronger driving force in American politics then than they are today. In defense of interest groups groups are free to organize and participate in the political process. There is the argument that if groups advocated for policies that threaten the interests of other citizens, then citizens that are threatened will organize their own interest groups. However, in practice, some groups are more well represented while others are underrepresented. Large industrial corporations have the resources to represent themselves, while other groups of citizens, such as the unemployed or the working poor, don't have the resources to organize into interests and lobby Congress. Most political interest groups pursue collective goods that, by definition, all group members will enjoy whether or not they are willing, whether or not they help to provide them. A person does not have to be an active member of the NRA to receive the benefits of NRA lobbying. Citizens often act in self-interest and free ride, which could doom the organization and the effort. People decide to contribute for various reasons. First, there are moral incentives for some interest groups. People feel a personal satisfaction when they express themselves through group activity. Think about people who contribute to the efforts of pro-life groups or environmental groups. They volunteer and contribute because they believe in the cause. Second, people are given selective incentives to contribute. These selective incentives are benefits that can be denied to those who do not contribute or do not join the group. For example, people who are dues-paying members of the NRA receive gun and hunting-related magazines that non-members do not. The number of lobbying organizations tripled from the 1960s to the 1990s. Active groups include corporations, labor unions, private sector organizations, and even governmental entities. After the 2012 election, a group of Obama's advisors formed the group Organizing for Action, which was formerly Organizing for America. The group used Obama campaign data to try and organize around the agenda of the Obama coalition. Groups need to specialize to survive. They make an exclusive claim to leadership and expertise on a particular issue. They need to do this in order to avoid appealing to the same supporters as other groups. Interest groups do many things to achieve their goals. First, they have to focus on their own survival by cultivating and retaining patrons willing to pay the bills associated with issue advocacy. Second, they explain government and create a consensus among their members. Third, their lobbyists try to gain access to elected officials and provide them information. They have an incentive to provide good information in order to stay in good graces with elected officials. Both sides, lobbyists and elected officials, need to trust each other. Fourth, groups help officials plan legislative strategy, draft legislation, and write rules and regulations. This concludes our discussion of interest groups. Next week, we will be covering the bureaucracy.